chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. What's your interpretation of life is like a box of chocolates?
Life's full of surprises. You don't know which one to call it.
It may be. Anyone remember the film?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Good film. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've seen it about 3,000 times.
Okay. Life's very sweet until you get the coffee cream.
Yeah. Definitely. So Romeo and Juliet. Romeo said to Juliet, Juliet is the sun. What does that mean? Juliet is the sun. What does that mean? It could mean different things to different people. That's for sure.
She gives him life. She gives him meaning.
Yeah.
She's right.
Yeah.
You know.
So it's pretty deep stuff. So whatever it means to you, it means to you. You unconsciously interpret the metaphor. So when Romeo, Juliet is the sun, he's stating a comparison. Is she really the sun? Okay, it's figurative. So metaphor is figurative. You're describing something and comparing it to something else. You're using figurative language. Now, had he have said, in the way he said it, it conveys Juliet is Romeo's world. Okay, so metaphor is a figure of speech. A word or phrase that's applied to an object that's not literally applicable. So we could all agree that it conveys Juliet is Romeo's world, in one sense. Had he have said Juliet is like the sun, then that's a simile. That changes the complexion. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So Juliet is the sun, Juliet is like the sun. It changes the whole dynamic. Okay? A song, when you hear a song, we've all got different meanings for the song. Do you have that? The song means something to you and something to someone else, and not so much the music, but that's your lyrics itself. Okay? So metaphor, we use them all the time without even being aware of them. You probably use hundreds a day without realizing you're using them, and they're powerful songs. There's a few tunes. So, okay, baby, you're a fire, you're worth. Come and show them what you're worth. Okay, we've all heard that song before. Katy Perry, and they're in every song all the time. Every rose has a thorn. That was a band called Poison.
So you Katy Perry friend?
Well, secretly, on full blast this morning in the car, and you hear all the time like, don't go chasing waterfalls, and the Eagles, Welcome Home to California. So Hotel California, the interpretation of that was by the Eagles was okay. If you're going to LA, East Hollywood, make the most of it while you're there. Don't go chasing waterfalls. Please stick to rivers and lakes. So what could that be insinuating? Do you think? Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Well, the video is about HIV, wasn't it? One of her friends about HIV.
Okay, I'm not sure. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yes,
so,
it's about.
Okay. Wow.
About not venturing too far in comfort zones.
Yeah. And that could be interpreted. So it could have many meanings.
Not taking serious, like having unsaid sex with strangers.
Okay. No, that's interesting stuff, and thank you for sharing. And certainly that can have different meanings to different people. It's a pretty powerful message. Every rose is a thorn. Well, does every rose have a thorn? So, okay, we won't go down there. But there's a guy obviously in the relationship who's been hurt and he's misinterpreted the situation. And Katy Perry's Firework, it's about self-worth, I think.
Yeah. About
self-love. It's just you coming out, and showing your worth. So it's going to mean different things to different people. And just like Jacob was really kind to enlighten us there on the waterfalls one, I didn't pluck them for any other reason other than they came to mind in my conscious awareness for whatever reason. I don't know. But metaphor can be spatial. Okay, it can be tonal. So a tonal metaphor, so you feel like, It can be a gesture. It can be postural, so you want to feel like that. Okay? It can be isomorphic, which we'll cover, shallow, and we'll cover these as we go along today.
What's isomorphic?
Isomorphic is a deeper metaphor. It's a metaphor that we draw a parallel where you've got a shallow metaphor. Like, for example, when I was working in sport one time, one of the lads used to always moan about training really hard. I'd say, you're a machine. A isomorphic metaphor is comparing one thing to another in a deeper way, and we're going to go into more detail with an isomorphic metaphor and how we structure that. But it's deeper, and we will do that, and we'll cover that shortly. So when I was working football, there was a lad, really talented footballer, and really, really good. And every time we did these 10 400 metre sprints, we'd sprint for 400 metres around the track, and he'd go, "Oh, not this again, Jim." And I'd be like, "You're a machine." And in the gym, "You're a machine." I'd call him a machine. At one time, when he was playing for a really, really big club, we were playing for another club, it made us a really, really big professional player. And I was coaching another team, and he shouts at me, he goes, "You're a machine." For he still remembered years later, Cole, if he's he's out there somewhere doing what he does, and it's quite powerful. So similarly would be like a machine, okay, with a way to get through, because you can stimulate realization. I was working in a care home one time in education, and this young lad in a care home, I'd taught him for a while. He had no academic experience, and he was doing really, really well. I suggested he goes for GCSE. They said, no, put him in ASDAN. I said, no, we're going to go for GCSE. Nothing against ASDAN, but we're going to go and give it a good go. And they said, "Look, Jim, he's not going to cope." And I said, "Well, let's give it a shot." I said, "It's on my head." And ironically, he's doing the exams, and halfway through, he's sort of struggling a bit. And in the education room, he's like, trying to do the exam. He's just throwing it away. "I can't do it. It's not making any sense." And I walk in there, and I knew enough to know about him to make a metaphor. And I knew he was a big Liverpool fan, the football team Liverpool. And Liverpool had played in the Champions League game against Milan, and they were losing 3-0. They came back and won 4-3. I think it was 4-3 in the end, something like that. Anyway, and I said to him, "Dude, what if Liverpool had gave up at half time? What if they gave up? It's only half time." I said, "You've got it all to play for." Is it the picture there? I said, "Those guys, second half, they came out." I said, "You can come out now. You've got the second half all to play for." And immediately had a response. He started working again. And we had this banter afterwards. It's only half time. And he would go on, and he got some grades. He got grades. He passed. He set the world on fire. But for someone who had no educational experience to have done that was a good thing. And so you can stimulate a realization. And how do animals communicate? They don't use words. They use gesture. They use sounds. Look how birds coordinate themselves when they fly. Okay, the birds, they fly in formation. And one will go to the back, and the other one go to the back. And if one bird falls down, they all go down to save the other bird. Okay, so animals communicate through gesture, through sound. The bats communicate through sonar, I think, so they can navigate their way through sonar. Cats have a way of communicating. You've got those people who do horse whispering as well. They communicate to horses. So animals don't use words.
The lion guy is amazing.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Exactly, it's a really, really good. If you get a chance to watch the guy, it's phenomenal how he does it. And evolutionary social biology, primal times, we didn't have language like we do now. If we went back 100,000 years ago, and we were here doing this course 100,000 years ago, I wouldn't have the capacity to speak in the way I speak now. Okay, if I wanted to, let's say for example, we're 100,000 years ago or so, and I decide, okay, I'd like a cup of coffee. My way of communicating wouldn't be the way I communicate now. Precisely. Well, if coffee existed back then, so it'd be different. So I'd be like, okay, how would I, if I was going to ask, therefore, I'd be like, and she'd be like, bang. Yeah. Okay. But we have this wonderful capacity to communicate. Language, it's only a very small part of what goes on inside our mind at a deeper level. So for me, metaphor, and we'll talk about later on, it's not just about communicating through speaking, it's using gesture, it's using sound. So we can communicate through gesture, through sound, and so on and so forth. So that's something to think about as we go along. In the hypnotic induction, and if you get a chance to listen to my iTunes, I do the iTunes sometimes, and I do them, part of my goal is to get them out there, and I'm not on any sort of crusade, but I enjoy doing them. If someone gets something out of it, it's more for education, then I've done my job. But what I'll do in the induction, for the people who hypnosis in the group, in your induction, you've got a wonderful opportunity to use a simile or a metaphor in the actual induction itself to induce trance. So, and as you feel your feet in the floor, is a causal link. It's in your conscious awareness. It's a truism, a yes set, which we'll cover on the next module. You begin to feel a sense of peace, just like a warm summer's day on a lazy Sunday. Okay? So simile is a way of embedding the concept that you want the person to realise. So what concept do I want the person to realise here, do you think? What concept do you think I want them to what do I want to stimulate at an unconscious level?
Relaxed.
Precisely. Orient them to a relaxed state, what we were talking about earlier, to that alpha state. Okay? So just like a warm summer's day. Okay, so the girl says to me, I feel nervous about presenting. The young woman says to me, and I feel nerves in my tummy, and I say, just like butterflies. And the butterflies begin to fly in formation. It's okay, I normalise it, have butterflies, and immediately it's having an unconscious effect. And she's thinking, what the hell is this guy on and talking about? But that's what I want, to a point, because indirect communications, they could have figured out already, they would have figured out already anyway. We talk more about indirect communication on the next module. So in the induction, you've got a great opportunity to induce or orient the person to where they want to go. Okay, so we talked about not only words and sounds, not only words, tones and sounds. So what you could do is, if your student, if your colleague at work, if your client says I'm feeling stuck, so what you could do is, what's the sound for feeling stuck? Might be so you're feeling and that's a way to communicate at a deeper level. Use a sound. So if the person says I'm feeling really sad, I feel really sad today, so you use a sound to convey that message, and that message goes to the unconscious mind. Okay, if the person's really anxious and they're anxious, they're frustrated, they're animated, they're overwhelmed. Okay, you feel, whoo, you want to feel like, whoo, you could use a sound, and that conveys a message to the unconscious mind. So we do more of that on the next module, but it's worth bearing that in mind. Are we okay with that? We sort of get the gist of that. Think of sounds, and have a moment to think of sounds that you could use when people present things to you. Think of sounds you could use or tones you could use that are quite useful, because the animals don't communicate through language, and we didn't always have language. And they say 70% of what we communicate, or 90% is tone and body language. So why don't we use more of it? It's powerful stuff. So the client might say, I'm feeling down, and you could say, you'd like to feel woo, the opposite end of the spectrum. Okay? So you can orient the person towards a solution through suggestion. So I feel nervous. I'm walking through this tunnel one time. I've got this big game of football. We're walking through the tunnel about to play another team, and the lad says to me, he goes, I'm feeling really jittery, really nervous. I'm feeling really, really nervous. And I says, that's great. It means you care. I'd be more worried if you weren't nervous. So you want to feel boom. It's like interrupt that pattern and channel the nerves and play. Okay? So it's useful. And you can use posture. So how does someone sit when they're down? They might sit like this. Or maybe it's exaggerated, I don't know. And you can say, okay, so you feel like this, and you want to feel like that. And you might walk into a classroom on Monday morning, and the students are like that. And I appreciate you all feel like this, but it's Monday morning, it's the start of a new week, and we can all feel like that. So using posture is quite useful for me. Body language is what we communicate a lot through body language. We're okay with that? Okay. So posture metaphor. So right now, we'll get a chance to practice these as we go along. We'll get a chance to practice. So right now you're feeling frustrated. So what would be a frustrated position? Fantastic. Actually, yeah, you do it really well. I mean, worrying people do it too well. What would be an angry posture? I may as well take the course. And what would be a sad posture? Yeah. You're doing it too good, guys. Okay. And you want to feel empowered. What would be an empowered posture? Yeah, exactly. A free posture. Feeling free. Feeling happy. La la. Yeah. That was a pattern interrupt, wasn't it? Okay, with tone as well. But it makes a massive difference. We underuse it. We really do. And I think we underuse this concept. I think, in my opinion, and I think some people I know professionally are really, really good at what they do. If you want to learn about creativity, see someone who's a martial arts, a musician, a sports person, a kindergarten teacher. They're damn creative because they have to be creative.
That's for you as well. If you're feeling really bad and you just jump
Yeah.
up and do a stupid dance,
That's a good
you
point,
feel,
for sure. No, exactly. And no, you're right, because if you adopt this position, it's almost impossible to feel anything other than
Well, if you smile, you can't feel sad, can you?
precisely. If we do a real smile, we did body language the other day. It's got to come from the yeah. And that's right. And I mentioned a woman I knew when I was doing some work with her. She'd always come into the therapy room like that and guard her neck, and the curiosity muscle in neck here. She'd sort of guard that, and that was, in my infinite wisdom, potentially to some sort of trauma. And one of the things we did to help her, and I'm not advising you do it with everybody, and I'm not advising everyone does that who's got trauma, but by getting to shift that and adopt that more, it would help us to sort of decompress. So definitely mind body we do. So we can think of gestures that we can use, which is quite useful. Gestures are quite useful, that's for sure. And you've only got to teach a course in Italy, you see plenty of animation. Okay, I teach there, and so no pun taken. My background's from there, so I don't want anyone to get. But it is different cultures, different ways. Certainly. So then you have to go on a course in Italy to get the gestures. Just cut some up on the road, and you'll get. Hey.
Well, if you look at people like a train like my ex is Greek. If you look at them and you can't see what they're talking about, or you see, it almost looks like they're coming to blows sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
They're talking about what they had for dinner.
Yeah. No, exactly. The old the discussion at the dinner table is not dinner table for other society. So the metaphor resonates deeper structures of the brain. We're going deep in the brain. It reaches deeper structures of the brain. Shakespeare. Okay, Shakespeare is quite interesting, and I studied Shakespeare. Believe it or not, I studied Shakespeare, and I wanted to learn what he did. I modelled Shakespeare, not directly because this is before my time. I'm not that old. Okay, but I modelled what he did. Well, thanks very much. Out of it as a compliment. Is that a compliment or what? I'll take it as a compliment anyway. You've just broken my fork now.
Sorry.
No, you're okay. That's okay. So, he would say things contextually that we wouldn't expect to hear. That's what Shakespeare would do.
I think it was Stephen Fry said, for all these grammar Nazis and stuff like that, if you read Shakespeare, it's completely...
Well, precisely. He'd do a lot of verbing and neologisms, which is an example of, of a neologism is say the word like chillax. There's no real word for it. Not that Shakespeare said chillax, because that's a new word, or anything like that. But these days, newly coined phrases that we use in everyday life.
Said to the Romeo, chillax.
Yeah. Just chillax, dude. And I know he was sexting. He was sexting Juliet. And Romeo was sexting Juliet. Here we go, Juliet, and she's like, whatever. Okay, but we sort of, and that would trigger in people the error-right negativity. It interrupts the conscious mind. It's like, okay, a good way to disrupt the conscious mind and engage the unconscious is using direct communication. So it's like a pattern interrupt. in a way, and it was quite powerful stuff. It really was powerful stuff, and certainly great therapists that use metaphor, and it's really powerful stuff. So a metaphor is a way of conveying a meaning, a representation. Poets have been doing it for years. Writers, musicians, it's all out there. Tony Robbins, if you go to his seminar, he does a fire walk. The fire walk is a metaphor. So he's got these like coal, and you've got to walk over hot coal. Don't do it if you've got nail varnish, by the way, on your feet. I'm joking. Not that I wear nail varnish on my feet. No. Not that I wear on my feet. Okay. He's got these hot coals, you've got to walk across it. But what does that metaphor mean? If I can walk over hot coals, what does that mean, do you think?
Do anything?
Precisely. So if I'm capable of doing that, I can do that. So, and I think from the point of view of giving people tasks to do, you can do your own metaphor. You can give them tasks to do. So if I can do that, I can do this. It's just a metaphor.
Have you done the fire?
Many years ago, yeah, I've done it, yeah.
I didn't do it because my friend the year before got her feet burnt.
Okay. I was like a cat on a hot tin roof. To use the metaphor. Yeah. I mean, I thought to myself, well, you know what? It's very unlikely that you're going to get burnt because you wouldn't put it there anyway. So I'm sure I made some sort of safety regulation. So I did it. It was fine.
I mean, they
cruising and a cigar.
I've seen it. They spray a bit of water on the coals. Not a lot of water, but a little bit of water.
There was a lady on the last course who did it, didn't it?
Yeah.
She was like, really,
Yeah.
really pumped.
Yeah, I did a handstand. I'm joking.
Showing off.
Handstand and walk across. Actually, you know what? I'd be more impressed if you walk on water, by the way, than hot coal. Yeah. My next course is going to be water. Okay, I'm going to say, Ashley, can you walk on water?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, if you can walk on water, I'm impressed. If you walk on hot coal, that's all. I'll use that. Stop that. Anyone can do that.
Theoretically, you should be able to walk on water.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Possibly. Yeah. I'll sink to the bottom. Okay, so. So the good news is it's only a metaphor here. We've all heard that, stab me in the back. And it can be really powerful, people talk in metaphor and you want to challenge it. If someone says to you, I've been stabbed in the back, it's pretty intense, isn't it? Oh, I'm banging my head against the wall. You're going to get a headache, you bang your head against the wall. So tune into people's metaphors, what they say.
Climbing a treacle mountain, that's my favourite one.
Which one's that, sorry?
It's like climbing a treacle mountain.
Okay, we've heard that, haven't heard that one before, but I have now. No, you're wrong one. Okay, there we go. I've heard it now. Okay. Yeah. So you activate the unconscious. That's what we want to do using a metaphor. Milton Erickson, Richard Bandler, John Green, the model Milton Erickson, and he used a lot of metaphor, story, and experiential stuff to use. He used a lot of metaphor in his communication to engage the unconscious mind. Okay, so metaphors can be expressed in sound, just to reinforce that, in gesture. We can reach deep areas of the brain, the limbic system. Many animals communicate with sound and gesture. Okay, and I think it's quite useful from our point of view to be aware of that. And it's quite useful because it's like an art, really. And art conveys a different message to different people. Okay, we all see a work of art and it stimulates an emotion in all of us, a feeling, unconsciously. Okay, the quickest way from A to B is a straight line. So if I'm trying to get from here to here, direct communication. Okay, I give a direct instruction, but it all depends. Now, what I learned, and one of the things is this is what I learned. I'm not going to credit myself for this. I'll credit one of my teachers for this, Jeff, who took over Erickson's foundation, who I've learned from. And what I learned from him is the level of directness that you go, to use my words, not his, is in proportion to the resistance you get from clients. So if a client's coming to see you and 30 of their family and friends have been successful seeing you, you can probably be more direct. If a client has been, or comes to you and says, I don't buy into what you do, I've been failed, they come in kicking and screaming, then, okay, you may want to peel off and be a bit more indirect, use story metaphor. And I'll give you examples of that throughout the course. just like the lad with the exam, the lad in football. And resistance isn't always, I don't want to do it. Resistance could be over compliance too, by the way, so bear that in mind. So for me, the level of your direction is proportional to the resistance you get. Okay, that's one thing to bear in mind. Because if the person could have solved their problem, they would have solved it already, consciously. They would have solved it. So why are they coming to you for? They could have solved it, they'd be fine. Okay, so for me, the metaphor is almost like before the farmer plants the seeds. Okay, they cultivate the grass. Okay, the chef. Okay, you've got a chef, and if the chef's got the ingredients, they put the knives, the forks, the ingredients, they put all that out. Okay, and think that with a metaphor. So it's a bit like, say, you can use direct communication. You can use a rational communication. They've even tried to rationalise with a teenager. So if I go in and rationalise that young teenager doing the exams, he's not going to say, if I say to the guy, you know what, do your exams, because if you do your exams, you might go to college and uni and get a job. He's going to be like, sod you. So I've got to find a way to get into his mind unconsciously. You're not going to go to a teenager, or anyone for that matter, in that sense, and teenagers' brain is continuing to develop till 22, 23, and say, you've got to find a way of creatively communicating. The teenager's not going to say to me, thank you, Jim, you're wonderful, you've shown the error of my ways. No, I've got to stimulate a realisation, okay? And that's the key for me, and any issue you've got, whatever the issue might be, say you don't want to eat that type of food, you're not going to talk yourself out of eating it, okay? The emotion we talked about yesterday in logic, emotion will generally always override logic, the limbic. So we want to do limbic exercises, go deeper in the brain. And we talked about the brain throughout the course, and I'm giving you some understanding around what we're doing, the science behind it all, which is key, okay? And leaders do it, the ability to inspire and motivate. There's no real substance what they use, but if we get a chance to watch that speech, now I'm not being political here by any way imagination, but watch the speech if you can. They called the speech that got Obama president in 2004. He uses loads of metaphors, okay? And a lot of political people do it, and they use metaphors based on people's values. I mean, he talked, I don't want to repeat what he said, I don't recall what he said 100%, but he used loads of metaphors. Such a powerful speech. Really got the crowd going.
He did a Bob the Builder, didn't he?
Sorry,
He did a Bob the Builder, didn't he?
Well, yeah.
Can we fix it? Yes.
Yeah, precisely. That was his. Yeah, that's a great. No, precisely. No, that was his theme. But in the speech, and many people, inspiring people throughout the course of history, have used metaphor. They use metaphor. They use story. There's no real substance to it. You have your own interpretation, but it really gets people going. And we talked about fire being a physical metaphor. Tony Robbins, okay? And I was doing some work one time with a family, and I used a spatial metaphor, being the family dynamic was struggling. I suggested the father of the family sit in a different role and be an observer from a different position, in adverse to the position of being dad. So take a different position, and that's a spatial, going in a different spatial metaphor. So rather than seeing it from here, see it from there, or see it from there, or detach yourself from the experience. Or how would someone else give you advice, or how would you give someone else advice, or what would someone else say? Okay, so the listener interprets it for themselves. Okay, the listener selects the meaning. Okay, for me, the composition is first we compose it, then delivery. Okay, but sometimes you don't know what you're going to say until you say it. So you don't have to be too methodical and think, what am I going to say? Metaphor-wise, it can be okay. I'll back myself. I didn't plan the Liverpool metaphor with the guy. I didn't plan the machine metaphor with the other lad in sport. In business, when I've used them, I don't know what I'm going to say until I say it sometimes. But there is a case for sitting back and thinking, okay, can I use some stories? And you've all got wonderful stories, and they're very powerful about how I overcome something, or someone I know overcame something. It's an indirect way of communicating. Okay, so I could be talking to Ashley, but really my communication is intended for Julie, or for Beth, or for Jake, or for other people. Does that make sense? So have you ever talked to someone and you've intended it for someone else? Or think of indirect communication. if you go back to your college days, university days, and you meet someone in the bar or the pub, and you say to them, would you like to come back to my house for a cup of coffee? Is that what you mean, really? Or would you like to see my record collection? I'm sure that's not what you meant. That's very indirect. Or maybe you're naive. Maybe you went back to a room naive like I was, thinking there's going to be coffee and there's all sorts going on. As you do, you turn up. Yeah, I'd love to see your record collection. Records are those things they used to have, for those who don't know. Back in the Stone Ages, there's these brown things. Now they've got these MP.
They're coming back in vogue.
Yeah.
They are.
I've got my collection. I'm not letting my collection go. My Pink Floyd collection is staying where it is. You're not getting your hands on that one there. So it's got to be of interest to the listener. So if I used an Arsenal metaphor, it probably wouldn't have mattered to that lad. So I used one that mattered to him.
It's funny how they stick in your mind, though. I remember an uncle of mine saying many, many years ago, you'd miss gangrene if you'd had it long enough.
Wow.
And that has stuck in my mind for years and years. And
That
he was
is
saying,
very true.
get rid of this bad boyfriend.
Okay.
That's what he was saying.
Wow.
You'd miss gangrene if you'd had it long enough, and it stayed with
Now you
you
put it in
for
my
years.
mind too.
That is a good metaphor
It's
because
no good for you, but you'd miss it if it's gone because you've had it for
even
such a
like
long time.
so if you look at animals' behaviour, all those kind of things, or thought patterns, it applies to that as well.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it did the trick.
Well, there we go. Yeah.
That's good, but that's as therapists, that's what we're up against, isn't it?
Yes.
Because people are so used to being in a bad place, they almost can't imagine getting out of that bad place.
Precisely. That's a great point, Julie.
And it's what they're
Yeah,
familiar with.
and the point being, if they could have solved their issue, they would have solved it already anyway.
Yeah.
So they come to
This is
you.
what people struggle with the older types of children, things like, well, but surely the kids are grateful to go into the care systems. Well, on one level they are, but if they've lived in a family that's abusive, that's all they know is that abuse.
Yes, of
And
course.
it's still mum and dad, so
Yes, of
still
course. No, for sure.
because they've been removed from it.
Precisely. Yeah, I mean, it's one of them where we can't judge someone else until we walk in their shoes, to use the metaphor as well, and from the outside in, and for sure. And for me, there's got to be a common ground to the listener. I don't know if you remember that metaphor. Who was that? Years ago, I think it was Eric Cantona came with that metaphor, and if no one really understood what he was saying, we probably deliberately did it that way. But the key thing is that for me, sort of knowing enough about the person to pitch it to them in a way it's going to resonate. That's quite useful. I think another couple of key points as well, which is important before we ever play around with this, is using body movements. If you've got a group, you can't match everybody's body movements, but you could match maybe the person in the group who's probably the most influential. Then they can all, when you're in a group and they all sort of sit in the same way when they've got deep rapport. So what you could do is observe maybe the breathing rhythm of one of them, or even gesture, and go there and say, for example, you could embed your command when you see the chest breathing up, and you can follow that breathing or heart rate cycle. Or you can sort of see an earring, and that'll tell you what the heart rate is, and you go in that sort of cadence, that rhythm. That's quite useful to do. And I've done this a lot, and I do this a lot when I teach in schools. Precisely, exactly. And I'll do it when I go into schools, and when I used to work in schools, challenging schools, people would say, how do you take, and I don't take control of anybody. And they were like, well, how do you get them to sort of engage? And he had teachers going in there, and I'd turn up out of the blue, and I'd utilise metaphor story, but also what I would do, I'd look at the student in the class who was the most influential in the group, and I'd take him and match him or her even, and by doing that, he'd or she'd start to engage, and they'd all follow. So I'd look at his breathing rhythm and I'd use gesture to monitor that. So the way he would I'd gesture, so the way he was breathing would be like, okay, that's the upper breath, and down. If I'd miss a beat, it's okay, I'd come back to it and just bring him in, or her in, and then you'd fall in a nice rhythm. And they're like, how on earth did you come in? These guys are like, knocking, each other all over the place, and within five, you'd sort of initiate. It wouldn't happen all the time, but there's a lot of times I managed to do that, and still do now for that matter. So breathing individuals key too. You'll notice when someone volunteers for session, when I present the story, metaphor, the hypnotic suggestion, the command I want them to take on board, sometimes what I'll do, I'll emphasize my voice or story of metaphor at the top of the breathing cycle, or the bottom of the breathing cycle. If I miss the cycle, it's okay. I can do a 2-3 cycle emphasis, and that's powerful. You get deep rapport. Okay? So whenever anyone volunteers, you'll notice now that I'll watch the breathing, and as I watch the breathing, I will emphasize the voice, the change, and you will, and your thoughts, and as you relax, and as you feel calm, just like a summer's day, and so on and so forth. And that's really powerful. So if you've got an interview coming up, great, deep rapport. Presentation coming up, deep rapport. Meeting coming up, deep rapport. Okay? If you're at a bar chatting someone up, there you go. There's a trick you can use. Not that I suggest anyone do that, by the way. But the breathing cycle is powerful. Okay? And they know now, scientifically, I believe there was a study that showed that someone who had depression had been in a room with people who didn't have, and by matching the breathing cycles, they came out of that state. Now that's quite loose, and obviously depression affects people in different ways, and the biological, psychological, social factors that contribute towards that. But you can check out and see.
You can get your baby to go to sleep if you get their breathing onto your.
Precisely, great point. Yeah.
I've done it. It works.
Yeah.
I do that myself.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
You just.
And suddenly by breathing deeper, you can keep the parasympathetic nervous system in.
You can't just
more calm.
All the time.
Yeah.
If people are shouting, say like you're having a discussion, someone's shouting. If you shout, if you match their shouting, and then gradually bring your voice down, they will tend to follow you.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, I can't hear what they're saying because I'm shouting, so I'm going to be a bit quiet. Or also another thing is if someone's really fidgety and agitated, it's just do something like tapping really fast at the speed that they're agitated, and just gradually, slowly calm it down.
Yeah.
It's amazing how it works.
Yeah, I mean it's worth a go, that's for sure. And it's all, I suppose, relative to situations. I suppose you've got to weigh the situation up, and certainly if someone's shouting in a store and they're holding up, then probably the best thing to do is sort of run the other way. But there's a point in that, definitely.
These days I look for the camera filming them because it's probably some kind of prank.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So shallow metaphor is what I mentioned earlier. So it's quite simple, just more like a simile. Okay, we'll get a chance to practice soon. And you got a deeper metaphor, which is more of a story. So you can go deeper, and you can use a story, which is quite powerful, that the person can relate to. And in the story, you can sort of change the characters, a bit like, say, Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, The Ugly Duckling, and so on and so forth, where, there's a relationship within the characters and the person. We'll talk more about that shortly. Embedded metaphors, a story within a story. You can do, and you see comedians do embedded metaphors a lot. What they'll do, they'll open one story, up another story, and then they'll sort of start closing each story. There's a story within a story, and that's really powerful. It can sort of a series of states. Okay, so 1 minute talking about one thing, and you're like in suspense. The next minute talking about another thing and another thing. So, and that can be 1 minute a story engages you, and you feel curious. Then the next moment, a new story, you feel excited, and the following story, you feel a sense of elation. And then you go back to the other story, you feel curious, and you feel elation, you feel happy, you feel sad, so you see it in films a lot. Okay, anyone watch films, by the way? Yeah, watch films. You watched that before? Okay. Why bother watching it when you know the ending? There's no point. You could have phoned me up. I would have told you, what? Ship sinks. Don't bother. Save 3 hours of your life.
Who's done that?
Yeah. Yeah. Who's watched it more than once? Who's watched it twice, 3 times?
I've not watched it once all the way through.
You don't know what you're missing out. Okay, but why watch it? Because it invokes an emotional. So why listen to music? Why do music? Why art? Why do we watch film? Because it invokes emotion. It's limbic.
There's room for 2 people in that.
Yeah, well, probably room for a few more. The thing is really, there's a story in the story. It starts with this lad who's struggling. I know too much, don't I? and you've got this woman who comes from higher society, and you've got this, and you've got that. So it's drawing you in. It's opening all these little stories, isn't it? But it's a metaphor, isn't it? In the end, really, it's a story. It's an embedded metaphor. Okay, the metaphor being whatever it means to you. So I shouldn't say no more.
If you're poor and go in a boat,
yeah.
she's going to let you drown.
Yeah. Exactly. Some things don't change, do they? The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Girls always end up with a diamond.
Which is like, it might be a bad egg, but it's got money left. So.
Yeah. There we go. We won't go down there. But isomorphic is, going back to that before, is corresponding to similar forms of relations. We construct an isomorphic metaphor, same key elements, events, subjects that the client has already talked about. So they're telling you a problem they've got, and then you can map a relationship with certain forms. So I suppose in plain English, someone's telling you a problem they've got, and you can use a relationship to an animal or animals. You could use a relationship to a superhero. You could use a relationship to anything other than the logic of what's going through their mind. Okay? So that can be quite useful. And we'll have a go at doing a few of them shortly. So I might say to someone who tells me, okay, I'm struggling, Jim. I don't know what to do. I don't seem to be getting this work done on time, and I've got to do this deadline. And I might say, okay, well, you don't need to be Superman and jump the building in one bound, just one step at a time. And that'd be quite useful, so I can sort of map across there, and you could use that with almost anything. So the butterflies in formation. It's okay to have butterflies, as long as they fly in formation. Okay? We don't have butterflies in the tummy, but it's a way of describing what's going on in that situation. So, and we can sort of go deeper and be really, really creative about, and I'll sort of give you a couple of examples shortly where I've done that in business, in sport, in life in general with clients. They present you with a problem, whatever that problem might be, and you utilise a metaphor and an indirect way of communicating. What can happen sometimes in resistance is the person can catch on. And I'm going to tell you what to do in those situations, so you can change the names involved, change the nouns in order to confuse the person, distract the conscious mind, to go to the unconscious as well. There's no need to explain, probably better not to. Let them convey their own meaning. For a metaphor, you can make a mental note of what you want to deliver, the message. Okay, what do I want to tell this person? Okay, changing names, nouns, using characters, animals, superheroes, Jack and the Beanstalk, Cinderella. Okay, have a couple of disqualifiers in your pocket. Okay, what do I mean by disqualifiers in your pocket? So one time I was in a meeting, and there was an issue going on, and there were a number of issues in this company I was consulting, and one of the directors of the company, we're having this conversation, he's telling me about some of the problems that were going on, and we're walking together, we're walking out to grab a bite to eat together, and as we're walking, he's sort of telling me about all the issues that they face, and so on and so forth, and on tendering and so forth, and whatever. And I went off on one, on a story, on a metaphor, and he's listening, and in my pockets are a couple of disqualifiers, meaning if the person says, do you mean this? And what they interpret the metaphor being is not what you want the message to convey, or it's not working for them, well, I would go on and say to him, well, since you're referring to that, we can talk about that. So it took him there. So you can carry a couple of disqualifiers in the back pocket. If the person says, are you suggesting that? Are you suggesting I do this? Well, now that you mention it, or actually I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting, and you don't have to point towards anything. It's quite useful to have that. And I had that one time when had a colleague of mine who they were over in the UK with a sports team, a football team, and they were playing a friendly. They had a friendly booked in at Manchester City. I think it was the under 14s, 15s at the time, and they'd arranged to play the team. And as it happens, another team was also booked in, and the other team that booked in to play them, I don't know the politics of the situation, but I believe that they had a financial interest, or there was a financial interest involved. Another team that came from Australia as well. But I believe that they had coordinated the game before the lad who brought his team that I knew did. There was some sort of situation, and I was like, okay, these kids, 14, 15-year-olds, young people, they're desperate to play. They've come 10,000 miles, they're all excited at the ground, and they've been told, you can't play because we've booked these other people in. And the coach was adamant, no, the arrangement was being made. But there was actually an arrangement for the other team too, and they'd made the mistake. And these kids, 14, 15, they're going to play some of the biggest teams in the country, really excited, travel 10,000 miles, really excited. And I'm like, okay, how can I get... And one of the parents says, Jim, work your magic, if you can, if you will. And I'm like, you know what, dude, it's fine. I fully appreciate and understand it and everything else. And we're sort of having this conversation. And I said, let me carry you, he's carrying these balls, footballs. And I said, let me carry them for you. And he goes, carry him, so I might disqualify. I was, no, I was just doing it because you had your hands tied, as one does, as you do. He goes, fair enough. And we have this sort of conversation and saying, I'm telling him, these kids have come 10,000 miles and they're really excited about the game and it's a big thing for them. And he goes, well, there's nothing I can do. It's not my problem. And he was adamant. He was like, not going to budge. Not going to budge, There was no way of budging. And we're sort of walking along and I'm doing everything I possibly can to somehow put a seed and at least come to some sort of arrangement. And he sort of put the balls down and bang! He looks at me, he goes, what are you suggesting, that I take the rap for letting these other kids play when we've booked to play this other team and it's all going to come back on me? I said, no, I'm not suggesting that, but since you're implying that, I don't mind holding my hands up. And if there's any issues, they can come to me. And that was one way to do this disqualifier, until eventually we came to a compromise. And said, well, let's do a tournament. I said, it'll be exciting. Why don't we do a freeway tournament? Why don't we sort of cut it all down? And he sort of stops and forth along the way. No, they're going to be exciting, be amazing. Just think of a tournament, just like, a mini tournament. We'll even have a trophy and so on and so forth. But until eventually, job done. So it's, really, really powerful stuff. And I use that story because it's quite useful to have you disqualified in there as well, when you got the resistance too. And you distract the conscious mind and you knock out the guard. You knock out the guard. You knock out that sort of, what's he or she on about? Because why would you talk indirect for? Why? People say, why talk indirectly? Why not just tell the person? Because we said earlier before. Now, if we could be rational, then we'd solve all the world's problems. But emotion governs a lot of behaviour. So ultimately, we can distract the conscious mind. If someone could solve their issue, they would have solved already anyway. They wouldn't come to you. So it's a way to go indirect, okay, through the back door, so to speak. Knock out the guard. It's quite useful. The semantic space are the same between the characters. So the meaning, the language, and logic. There is a relationship there between the characters you use in the actual metaphor you use along the way, on the journey. The unconscious has many relationships. That's why our dreams that we talked about today are really, really weak. Because your unconscious mind forms many relationships with many different things. Okay? We talked about the body rhythm to match that, to get deep rapport. Okay, so go into that sort of deep rapport. And I think that we've sort of talked a bit about the brain throughout the course, and it's been quite useful. But one thing to bear in mind, and so you've got for example, the anterior cingulate cortex in the brain. This is one example, and that's one of the brain that will focus on what's relevant and not relevant. That's the bridge between unconscious and conscious. Okay, that helps you distinguish information and the relevance of that. It helps you to put together thinking and emotion and screen out what's important and not important. Okay, brain, and that part of the brain is an unconscious and conscious function. Because that part of the brain is involved in, that region of the brain is involved in decision making and emotional regulation. And we know a lot of our emotion is unconscious, as well as vital regulation, like physiological processes, like blood pressure and heart rates, as well as. So one time I was doing a NLP course, the Air Force, and to show you how powerful this stuff is, one of the guys who was a senior staff member there, and I was going into hypnosis and relaxation and imagery, he said, that's a lot of bollocks. And I said, okay, to peel away, and how is this for a metaphor, and how is this to bypass resistance? Okay, if you would kindly like to take a seat, and I'm going to measure your heart rates and blood pressure. I'm not medically qualified, but I know about sports science. And I took heart rate and blood pressure, and his heart rate was about 90 beats per minute, probably because I was winding him up, and his blood pressure was probably a little bit higher than what it normally is. And about 10 minutes later, when I did hypnosis, it came down significantly. It came down to the point that it was about 60 beats per minute. That's 30 beats per minute less stress on the heart, about 20,000 beats less per day. That might not stay that way all the way, but then do it again. And I said to him symbolically, I said, you know what I'd like to do now? Is what does that mean in the real world? I said, I want you to sprint to the end of the room and back again and make a decision. I'm going to give you a question and answer it. And he did. I said, now I'm going to get you to compose yourself. And I'm going to ask you a question, and you've got to answer it. I'm going to give you a series of tasks. I said, are you better placed when the heart rate's going up or when you're more composed? There was no comparison. The score, the behavioural experiment suggested that when you could regulate, it was far more powerful. So that shows you how powerful hypnosis can be, meditation can be. And what he did was a favour for me, because he was going to polarise the group if I didn't take that action. Okay, and he's only working from his map of the world, so it shows you how powerful it can be. So you've got parts of the brain that connect the conscious to the unconscious, okay, that will make their own meaning. It's powerful stuff that play a role in motivation, that play a role in goal-directed behaviours. The goal for the young man was to finish the exam. The motivation to finish the exam wasn't there because he felt that he was failing. So I had to find a way in. When I asked Colin to do the 10 400-metre sprints at the football, the goal for him was to be a professional footballer, not to do these 400-metre runs, but I felt by doing these runs, they're going to put him in a good place to become what he wants to be. So we've got to find a way to get in there. The motivation. Okay? So we're going to have a go shortly at creating a metaphor. And what we can do is follow the steps we're going to do shortly. So a one-to-one relationship with the key elements presenting context of the problem. So we can stimulate realization. They may or may not interpret it consciously, and it doesn't matter if they don't interpret it consciously. It's their own meaning. The fact you've activated certain structures is enough for a state change, because you've got different states that are more effective for different situations. Okay? The intention of metaphor. Remember rapport? We talked about getting deep rapport. Okay? The purpose of the metaphor, overcome the barrier, install a new message unconsciously, elicit a resourceful state in the audience, like a top speaker would do, using metaphor, empowering the group. Okay? We can use metaphors to sum up a complex situation to make it easy to understand. You know, the ugly duckling and Cinderella. So you chain the audience for a series of states. You're proposing a new idea, you can use a metaphor. If you're going to sell a workshop, you can use a metaphor. Okay? Really powerful stuff. There's some basic steps you can use to generate metaphor. We're going to cover now. I'm going to have a go shortly. We're going to cover these shortly, then we'll have a break and come back to them and have a go. And they are step one, and we can have a go in pairs. We can pair up shortly and identify a situation or an issue, okay, the person has, and think present state, problem state, and desired state, and what the outcome is. Okay, so I feel nervous about presenting, I want to feel confident, and if I feel confident presenting, I've got a better chance of getting the job, the deal, promoting my services. Okay? I feel nervous about the football game. I want to feel excited, and if I feel excited, I'm going to play freer. Okay? I feel a bit jittery about driving. I want to feel calm, and by doing that, the journey will be easier to get from A to B. Okay? Then we can use significant people, places, things in the situation. Okay? And the relation between them. Okay, so I feel like I've got butterflies. It's okay to have butterflies as long as they fly in formation. Okay? You can use people, places, things. Okay, the Jack and the Beanstalk story. Remember the Jack and the Beanstalk story? The beans and so on and so forth. Okay? Step 3 is keep the desired state in mind. Desired state, the group students are unmotivated on Monday morning. Desired state, motivate. They're motivated, they're going to get through to class. It's the same energy to do something good as to do something bad. You may as well do it good. Okay? Chunk from the present state to a category, a situation, an example of. Okay? So, when you're sailing the seas, you see a sailing boat in the sea and the wind blows this way. And you fight the wind, it keeps blowing you back. So, as the wind blows you back, you realize that it's better to sail with the wind, and you adjust your sails. And sometimes when you've got a goal in life, you don't get what you originally intended to get, but you go to where you need to go. And by going to where you need to go, you can then choose where you go thereafter. And you can sail this way, you can sail that way. But if you see a ship speeding along the ocean at maximum speed and you want to make a change, it takes a bit of time for the ship to turn. You're not going to just, a ship flying and it's going to turn all of a sudden. It's going to take a bit of time to turn. And if it goes that way, it can go that way. And you know that an aeroplane flies 90% off course. But what an aeroplane knows, or the pilot knows, where they're going to go, the outcome in mind. So a coach, you've got the outcome in mind. You know where you're going. And a sat-nav, and no doubt most of you have got sat-navs, and not many people can tell how a sat-nav works, the complexity of the sat-nav, technically, they couldn't create one, but just like the brain, the sat-nav. You can program it if you've got a postcode and an address. So what's really important is that you keep the desired state in mind. So the students aren't motivated. The students aren't confident in the exam. Confident, providing they've got the competence. So we can keep that in mind. If they're confident, they've got a better chance of fulfilling the grade criteria. And the final note here is, what is another example of this category situation? It includes the possibility of ending up in desired state. So you can use analogies, people, place, things, and relations between them. I think for me, quite useful, we break shortly, have a nice break, we'll pair up and we'll just play ball. Now, get our creative juices on. Let's get our creative heads on and let's play ball. Let's really enjoy it. And you can work on it. It's a great communication skill to have. It's phenomenal skill to have. That was a pattern interrupt there. and we'll play ball. I think it's really important for me is to just get the creative brain going. Think. And there's going to be times where you're going to think, okay, I don't know what I'm going to say until I say it. There's going to be times that you can sort of pre-have an idea. But you know your group better than anyone else knows your group. And you know your clients, your colleagues and co-workers better than everyone else. And remember one thing, that every 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step. So if you're new to this and you've been doing it anyway without realizing that you've been doing it, it's the first step. So we're not comparing ourselves to anybody else where this is concerned, and you're running your own race. It's like the sprinter in the blocks of a race. The best chance the sprinter have got of winning the race is just focus on their own race. The blocks goes off. And you know why they use a gun in sprinting? Because the auditory cortex as a quicker response to the visual cortex, because the brain has a delayed response to external stimuli. So for me, think sprinter. Gun goes off and just run your own race. And the journey of 1,000 miles, that's his first step, and improve in your own journey. And think outcome. Think, okay, what am I doing it for? Because you could turn up and be, and someone told me one time in a class, I think it was Jeff or it might have been Brent Geary told me in the class one time, and he trained at Ericsson, he said that in the 80s it was like the wild, wild west of metaphor. People just doing it for the sake of doing it. So you don't want to probably do it for the sake of doing it. There's got to be a method in madness, but it is such a powerful way to communicate. And the irony is you're doing it already anyway. And because you're doing it already anyway, you can do more of it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. But where you can improve, you improve. If there's some way that you're struggling to get through to someone, this could be the way to get through. Because you're faced with a situation where the young lad won't do the exam. Okay? He won't, or she won't do the sprinting. They won't let you play that game. You're stuck in a business thing. And people have got their head buried in the sand. And you can gift wrap an idea for them. It's only half time. You're a machine. And you can use gesture. And how would you feel? How would you like to feel? And so on and so forth. And can you make me a cup of coffee? And I'm going to explain now.
Gesture back.
Yeah. So there we go. Yeah. We won't go down there. But we're going to have a break now for 5 minutes or so. Then we're going to sort of really play ball, and then we'll move on to the next ball and go from there. So pretty awesome. And we've got that here as well, by the way. So we're ready to cook.